Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's update on Tropical Depression 2, which is in the Gulf. It is aiming towards the Gulf Coast, and it is likely going to become a named storm before then, our second named storm of the hurricane season. We're going to go over all you need to know with our tropical threat, including the latest stats from the National Hurricane Center and what the models are showing today. So, with that being said, let's get started. First off, by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center. We're going to get to the cone in just a little bit. But first, the latest on Tropical Depression 2 right now in the Gulf. Maximum sustained winds at 35 miles per hour with a minimum central pressure of 1,005 millibars, located at 28.7 north and 85.8 west, and it is moving northwest right now. Again, moving towards the Gulf Coast here. And taking a look at the cone, for the next 5 days, you can see we will, in general, continue to move on a northwest direction before it's going to bend back towards the west here, and very likely we are going to see a landfall in eastern Louisiana. And we do have tropical storm watches in effect right now for most of the Gulf Coast, from western Florida all the way up until eastern Louisiana at this time. And I'm pretty sure that once we get this storm to actually intensify into a tropical storm, which is probably going to do so in just a matter of a few hours here, all of these, I bet you more than likely most of these watches here are probably going to be upgraded into warnings, especially I'd imagine for the New Orleans area, the New Orleans metro, which is very nearby, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get in a watch and a warning area as well. But beyond then, the Western Gulf here still needs to watch out for impacts, as more than likely we will see this storm riding the coast. And even if we don't get a tropical storm here for Western Louisiana and Texas, more than likely we will still see impacts of some sort, and I'll show you with what the models are showing in a little bit. And we definitely still need to keep our options on the table today, even though we're starting to see more towards a trend, and we're starting to get more of an idea of potentially a eastern Louisiana landfall with this system. But I'll show you what all the models are showing in just a little bit. Here's a look at how it's doing right now, though, on satellite, to kind of get an idea of what are we looking at right now. And today, we are definitely dealing with a better organized system. If you remember yesterday, we had very anemic convection. We had a pretty decent low-level center here. This had a pretty decent structure, but convection was anemic. It was struggling with dry air, and that persisted into this morning. But ever since we have started to see convection begin to blow up, we now have much more consistent convection with the system. And you can even see we have some convective bursts firing up right now. So we definitely have a system now that looks much more like an actual tropical cyclone, and probably again on its way to becoming a named storm here. But this still is dealing with some dry air to the north and also some northerly shear as well. So a lot of the cloud cover and convective activity is kind of lopsided to the south, and maybe that might actually kind of bring down the potential a little bit. Well, first of all, in terms of how strong this could get. So at most, we're probably talking about a low end to mid-range tropical storm here. So we're probably not talking about a strong storm. And that probably will also keep a lot of the rainfall totals as well south. So maybe we won't have as big of a rainfall threat with this system, but still, more than likely, we will have impacts. And I'll touch on those impacts later on. But speaking of how the storm is doing right now, and I really quickly want to refresh this to see how things are. But we do have recon, which is inside of the storm, giving us pressure updates and wind updates as well. And I do believe the last pressure that the recon found while they were inside the storm here was roughly about 1,005 millibars. So it roughly lines up with what the National Hurricane Center has right now. But recon is out sampling the storm. It's not very interesting, I guess you would say, right now, given the fact that this is a very weak storm. But it is important that we have the recon out there, because recon data is used in model data, especially when it comes to hurricane models. So it's going to help us give a better idea in its future, and we'll have a better idea of where this will make landfall, who is going to see what in terms of impacts, and in general, what to expect going forward with this system. And I definitely think that that information will be very vital, especially given that we are talking about a land impact threat here. So with the talk of models being said, let's take a look at the AT&T model track guidance for Tropical Depression 2 here. And very much like the National Hurricane Center forecast, most of the models are bringing this towards the west here, maybe moving in a northwesterly direction for a little bit longer before bending back towards the west, and maybe, depending on what model you look at, maybe a slight track towards the west-southwest. And so that still puts the Western Gulf here at play. Maybe places like Texas and Western Louisiana are not entirely out of the woods just yet in terms of tropical impacts here. But as you can see here, a lot more of the models are clustering on a eastern Louisiana landfall, whether it be near New Orleans or just south of New Orleans. Much more today versus yesterday. The models were kind of all over the place, with some models showing this, completely missing Louisiana to the south, and that would have been an interesting scenario, especially for Texas. Maybe this would have been a stronger storm. But also as well, it looks like the northeastern Gulf Coast here, maybe Florida and Alabama, are probably going to avoid a direct landfall from this system too. But either way, it's not really going to be a strong system for whoever gets it. And here's the model intensity guidance for it. Most of the models right now, most of them expect this to become a tropical storm, but the strongest track plot here you see is not even above 50 knots. So again, more likely, and kind of given the pictures and its progress today, more than likely we are probably looking at a weak to moderate end tropical storm when all is said and done with this, but it's still going to be an impact nonetheless. So with that being said, let's take a look at what the models, the operational models individually show today. And let's start off with the GFS. And you can see here, GFS, as I showed you with all the model track guidance here before, generally moves this on off to the west. Maybe it'll intensify a little bit, once again probably becoming a weak to moderate end tropical storm before making landfall in Louisiana, and then generally kind of riding along the coast here before dissipating completely as it gets far west enough, and it probably loses a lot of energy. But more than likely, this will bring impacts here to the entire central and western Gulf Coast, as it probably will stay very near the coast, and we're still going to deal with rainfall and gusty winds and everything like that. So even if this makes landfall in eastern Louisiana, more than likely central and western Louisiana would still probably have to watch out for impacts, even going into Texas with the rainfall and things like that. But again, weak tropical storm, maybe moderate tropical storm here, more than likely making landfall in eastern Louisiana by the time we get to Wednesday afternoon, maybe evening. Timing will probably vary a little bit, but I'd say around that time frame is most likely, and that's what the GFS shows. And I think the GFS is more than likely the solid option now. As I said before, for the last few days, especially leading up to the weekend, the GFS was very bearish in terms of showing any development here in the Gulf whatsoever. And it was literally playing catch up when we suddenly saw this disturbance here, or what was, Invest 91L, now Tropical Depression 2, suddenly formed yesterday, and all the models have been playing catch up. But it just goes to show how quickly things can spin up in the Gulf of Mexico or America or whatever you want to call it. And I did call it from the beginning of the weekend that I wouldn't be surprised if we have a tropical surprise. And well, we are dealing with it. So that is the GFS down. Enough of me ranting about, just how crazy, how weird the tropics can be. I'm pretty sure you are all aware of that by now. What about the hurricane models, though, since we now have that? The hurricane models will especially be interesting. Let me take you to the MSLP and wind here. The hurricane models will especially be interesting to monitor over the next few hours, especially now that we have more recon data, because, again, recon data is especially a big net positive for the hurricane models. Sometimes the hurricane models can be spot on once they have recon data. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens here with the models in the next few hours. But still kind of, remaining along the same, train of thought of what the trends have been today so far. The H-Wharf showing here, weak to moderate tropical storm. They're forecasting potentially as high as 50 knots in terms of winds, with the pressure in the 960s. It gets as low as 996 millibars. So again, that's a decent tropical storm. But the H-Wharf here actually has this moving more to the northwest here and actually making landfall in far western Florida. So a little bit different than the GFS showing a landfall in eastern Louisiana. But eventually the low pressure, interestingly enough, kind of pivots back towards the west here into Louisiana. So that is definitely an interesting outcome from the H-Wharf. The H-Mon, on the other hand, running right now, actually, and interestingly enough, they actually still intensify this somewhat. Looks like the H-Wharf is trying to intensify this to high-end tropical storm, maybe even low-end hurricane a little bit, because the maximum intensity here is 988 millibars. So maybe this could still pull some sort of surprise. You never know. So interesting that we see a little bit of a difference in the models here, but the same general track moving towards the northwest and then eventually towards the west and probably towards eastern Louisiana here. And we even see the ensembles also agreeing with that idea as well. The European ensembles, mostly all of them now, kind of agreeing on a northerly to west-northwesterly track, leaning towards eastern Louisiana. And you especially don't see any more of those ensembles like we saw yesterday that were showing this storm potentially bending back towards the west completely before it even hits Louisiana, and it ends up in the western Gulf here, and potentially doing some interesting trickery. So it's nice that we also have the European ensembles coming on board with the general idea here, as well as the Google AI ensembles. They too have also all shifted north and are moving towards Louisiana. So it looks like we have a general consensus now that more than likely whatever happens here will be pointing towards Louisiana, and that is more than likely where the landfall will be. But, of course, we also have the impacts as well, and that's what I want to talk about here for the remainder of the video, the impacts. And as I mentioned before, the impacts will be more than just where the exact landfall happens, because first of all, a tropical storm is more than just the tiny dot on a map where the track is or where it makes landfall, but this will also, according to the track model guidance here, as I showed you, it looks like we could probably deal with a storm that kind of rides the coast here. So impacts will still be felt for many along the Gulf Coast, and the key messages here from the National Hurricane Center sum it up pretty well. First of all, the depression is expected to gradually strengthen and could bring tropical storm conditions to portions of the Gulf Coast from Florida, Panhandle westward to southeastern Louisiana Tuesday and Wednesday. A storm surge watch is in effect for Alabama, Mississippi, and southeastern Louisiana coasts, where life-threatening storm surge is possible. And then interests elsewhere in Louisiana and Texas should monitor the progress of the system, as additional watches could be required tonight or Tuesday. So we might get some more watches and warnings here for the coast of Louisiana and Texas, and it certainly makes sense given where the track is being forecasted right now. But this interesting number 4 point here as well, which is important to watch for, and that is the potential for flash flooding through Friday along the Gulf Coast, and that'll be from the rainfall, which, of course, as I always say, is an impact that you cannot underestimate. So, from these key messages, one thing that was mentioned, storm surge. Another kind of flood impact that people underestimate, and the storm, and we are expecting storm surge here, potentially up to 2 to 4 feet from the mouth of the Mississippi River, stretching all the way to the Alabama and Florida border. And this is especially being helped by the fact that we do have a east to west movement here directly towards Louisiana. So we're going to have onshore flow pushing directly into Mississippi. So that's probably why there's especially a storm surge watch here in effect for the Mississippi coastline, although I'm pretty sure there will also be storm surge watches and warnings added for Louisiana. So if you are along the coast, beware of flooding from storm surge. And 2 to 4 feet, that might not be a lot. It might not be as much as some instances of storm surge, which we've seen along the Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana Gulf Coast here. Quite an infamous history of hurricanes in this area. But 2 to 4 feet is no joke. I mean, that pretty much, can overwhelm completely a small child or a toddler, and can probably knock you off your feet as well if you are in 2 to 4 feet of storm surge that hits you. So no joke, and will probably still cause flooding here along the Gulf Coast. But also the rainfall as well. And the rainfall forecast will probably once again verify or vary depending on any shifts that we have in the track here, but also expecting rainfall as well. Probably the peak of the rainfall going to be right along the Gulf Coast here in southeastern Louisiana, more than likely because, as I said before, more than likely what we have here, this system will be kind of lopsided to the south. So most of the precipitation should stay on the southern end of the storm. So luckily, more than likely, we will probably not see as big of a rainfall threat for maybe the central and eastern northern Gulf Coast like Mississippi and Alabama. But you guys still have the storm surge threat to keep in mind of, and definitely something to not brush off, because as I always say, when it comes to flooding, whether it's rainfall or storm surge induced, those two categories are the top killers and the top damage producers when it comes to tropical cyclones. So still a lot to keep in mind here with Tropical Depression 2. Over the next few days, I will continue to monitor the progress of this system closely. And I'm sorry for not posting an update earlier today. I feel like I should have done that. And I also feel like I should have been a little bit more active on Twitter, but I kind of have life going on right now. But don't worry, we will have updates throughout the next few days here on Tropical Depression 2. Probably soon to be Tropical Storm Bertha here in just a little bit. So make sure to stay tuned for that. If you haven't already done so, I would once again really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Also like this video as well. And also follow me on Twitter too for more consistent updates there. With model runs, latest, National Hurricane Center tracks, or just the latest on the storm itself. Any interesting things that I see happening in real time, I post them to Twitter immediately, so you could stay caught up on there throughout the day instead of having to wait for me to post an update on YouTube. But obviously, watch out for that as well. And of course, I will continue to do these updates on YouTube throughout the next several days, as we still have the threat from Tropical Depression 2. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for this evening's video. If we get an upgrade to Bertha tonight, maybe I might post another video later on in the evening. But if not, definitely expect at least 1 or 2 videos from me tomorrow. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And I'll talk to you guys again very soon.